Throughout history, there have always been those who claimed they came to save the people. But some of them turned power into something so enduring, not even death could erase it. They weren't just dictators, they became shadows that followed entire nations for generations. Some killed with a smile, some with a sword, and others with nothing but ideology and a pen. In this video, we'll introduce you to 10 dictators whose names aren't just found in history books. They haunt the nightmares of entire nations. Men whose names you may not know well, but whose impact is still chilling. Welcome to the darkest chapters of power. When Idi Amin seized power in Uganda through a military coup in 1971, many believed a new savior had arrived. A towering man in a uniform full of medals, flashing a confident smile and calling himself a man of the people. But behind that smile was something darker, something that didn't take long to show its true face. Amin quickly broke the rules, silenced his opponents, and replaced hope with fear. Thousands were arrested, many of them never came back, some simply disappeared. Behind the closed doors of prisons, torture became routine. The Nile River, once a source of life for Uganda, turned into a dumping ground for bodies. Amin saw himself as more than a president. He gave himself absurd titles like Conqueror of the British Empire, King of Scotland, and even the last King of Africa. He claimed he was in direct contact with God and that his decisions were divinely inspired. Many close to him believed he was mentally unstable, or at the very least, driven by madness. In 1972, in a sudden and brutal move, Amin expelled over 50,000 Asians, mostly of Indian descent, from the country. People who had been essential to Uganda's economy were made homeless in a matter of days and their properties were looted. The move devastated the country's economy, but Amin didn't care. During his rule, it's estimated that between 100,000 and 500,000 people were killed. Often, their only crime was thinking differently or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. There were even rumors that Amin was a cannibal. Some witnesses claimed they saw human remains in his palace freezers. While these claims were never officially proven, the scariest thing about Idi Amin is this. Even if he wasn't a cannibal, he was still very much a monster. In 1979, after a Tanzanian invasion and internal uprisings, Amin fled the country, first to Libya, then eventually to Saudi Arabia. He lived there in quiet exile until his death, never tried, never punished, not even for a single day. Idi Amin wasn't just a dictator, he was the embodiment of a nation's nightmare, a man who built his crown from corpses and believed he was king. Let's talk about one of the most ruthless dictators the world has ever seen, yet many don't even know his name. His name was Pol Pot, a man with a calm smile and a gentle face who orchestrated the deadliest genocide of the 20th century in a small country called Cambodia. He believed society could be rebuilt from scratch, people reshaped, and history rewritten. But the price of this twisted vision was nearly 2 million lives. In 1975, Pol Pot led the Khmer Rouge, an extreme communist group that marched into the capital under the banners of justice, equality, and national rebuilding. People welcomed them with flowers and smiles, hoping the civil war was finally over. But no one knew this was just the beginning of a nightmare. Just hours after entering the city, they ordered a complete evacuation. Millions, from children to the elderly, even the sick, were forced out of their homes at gunpoint and made to walk miles into the countryside. Why? Because Pol Pot saw the city as a symbol of corruption and capitalism. He wanted a country where only farmers lived. He shut down all universities, destroyed libraries, and even banned glasses, believing those who wore them had read too much and were therefore counter-revolutionaries. During his 4-year rule, people were sent to brutal labor camps. Food was scarce, often just a few spoonfuls of rice a day. Disease, hunger, and torture were rampant. But the worst place was the infamous torture center called Tuol Sleng, or S-21. Thousands were interrogated, tortured, and executed there. Most had committed no crime other than the suspicion that they might someday pose a threat. Pol Pot saw his greatest enemy as thought itself. He feared questioning, doubting, and asking, and so anyone who disagreed even slightly was eliminated. He tried to build a perfect society where everyone thought the same, lived the same, and, most chillingly, died without a sound. In 1979, after a Vietnamese invasion, his regime fell. But Pol Pot fled to the jungles and continued to lead the Khmer Rouge remnants for years. He was never put on trial, never held accountable. Only in 1998, old and frail, did he die, on a rainy night, without justice, without remorse. Perhaps the bloodiest truth of all is this: a man capable of such atrocities died in silence. But the screams of his victims remain etched in history. Pol Pot is dead, but his shadow still weighs heavily over Cambodia. Now it's time for a man who, unlike the loud dictators of history, always stayed in the shadows. A man rarely talked about because many of his crimes were covered up with silence and cunning. But the truth is, for years, he ruled a country with an iron fist, and the marks of his repression still remain in Spain's history. Francisco Franco was a short but cold-blooded general, known to many only by his military uniform, a man with cold eyes, a quiet voice, and a methodical mind, but beneath that calm exterior hid one of the most ruthless machines of repression of the 20th century. In the 1930s, Spain was engulfed in political chaos. A civil war had erupted. Communists, anarchists, monarchists, and republicans all fought for a piece of the country. Amid this turmoil, Franco emerged. With the backing of fascist Germany and Italy and promises of order and stability, Franco rose to power in 1939. But the stability he brought came at a heavy price. In the years that followed, thousands of political opponents, writers, teachers, intellectuals, and even priests disappeared. Some were executed, others imprisoned, and many suspiciously vanished. Franco built an army of informants and secret police, leaving no room for opposition and practically destroying freedom of speech. He didn't kill his opponents with shouting, he killed them with silence, with laws that criminalized freedom and trials whose verdicts were pre-written. Spain became a country where people spoke quietly even in their own homes, never knowing which walls might be listening. One of the darkest chapters of Franco's rule was the harsh cultural and linguistic repression. While Spain is a multicultural country, Franco ordered regional languages like Catalan and Basque to be banned. Children were forbidden from speaking their mother tongues. Even naming children in local languages became illegal. But perhaps the most iconic crime associated with Franco's name was the bombing of the town of Guernica, an airstrike carried out with Nazi support that killed hundreds of civilians. This atrocity later inspired Picasso's famous painting, A Scream Against Terror and Silence. Although Franco declared neutrality during World War II, his regime sympathized with the fascists. What saved him was his political maneuvering after the war. Instead of clinging to ideology, he aligned with the West and presented himself as a barrier against communism. This allowed him to stay in power for decades with little interference from the world. He remained in power until 1975. A man who kept Spain trapped in a long, heavy sleep of silence, censorship, and fear for nearly 4 decades. And when he died, thousands of his victims were still alive, victims who never had a voice, or if they did, no one dared to listen. Franco ruled in silence, and he left silently. But the memory of his silent domination still lives on in the collective memory of the Spanish people. Gaddafi was a dictator unlike any other. A man who was a mix of madness, charisma, contradictory ideologies, and absolute narcissism. When we talk about Gaddafi, we are talking about someone who saw himself as a prophet, a king, a philosopher, and a global hero of justice. But in reality, Gaddafi was the man who held Libya in an iron grip for over 4 decades and took millions hostage to his twisted mind. In 1969, at just 27 years old, Gaddafi led a bloodless coup that overthrew the king of Libya. He was a charismatic young man, dressed in military uniform, carrying revolutionary books and shouting slogans against colonialism and imperialism. People had hope, but that hope soon turned into fear and then terror. Gaddafi didn't compare himself to any other leader. He considered himself unique. He began writing a book called The Green Book, where he laid out his strange political, social, and economic ideas. In it, he rejected parliamentary democracy, mocked capitalism and communism, and claimed he had a better system to run the world. Based on this book, he created a bizarre political system that supposedly gave power to the people, but in reality, all power was concentrated in his hands. During his rule, thousands of political opponents disappeared. Some were tortured in prisons like Abu Salim, some died under torture, and some were executed for no reason other than a joke or a simple criticism. Even abroad, Gaddafi sent agents to assassinate opponents, from London to Athens, Cairo to Beirut. He was a dictator, but not a classic one. He loved attention. He set up his Bedouin tent in the middle of Paris and New York. His personal guards were all women, women who wore military uniforms and, as he claimed, were all virgins. Colorful clothes, theatrical gestures, and speeches that sounded more like monologues from a mad play than the words of a leader. In the 1980s, Gaddafi financed terrorism worldwide. He supported Irish rebels, was involved in the murder of athletes at the Munich Olympics, and most notably, in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, killing 270 people. These attacks made Libya a pariah state. But despite all this, Gaddafi was smart. When pressure mounted, he gradually changed his face. He came in the door of peace, abandoned nuclear programs, and even posed for photos with Western leaders. European countries returned one by one to Tripoli, signed oil deals, and once again forgot what kind of monster they were dealing with. But Gaddafi never really changed. He only changed his clothes. His people were still hungry, still had no freedom, and even the internet was restricted. When the Arab Spring broke out in 2011, Libya woke up too. People took to the streets. And Gaddafi, as always, ordered a crackdown. But this time, the world was watching. NATO intervened, civil war erupted, and after months of fighting, Gaddafi was captured, hiding in a sewer pipe. The video of his death and the brutal way he was killed remains one of the most controversial images of the 21st century. A man who saw himself as the great leader of Africa, the father of the nation, and the savior of the Arab world, ultimately died like a desperate fugitive. Gaddafi's death was not only the end of a dictator, but also the beginning of chaos that has yet to leave Libya. A country that after his fall was torn apart, dragged into civil war, and still has not found peace. And this is where Gaddafi, even after death, still lives on in the darkness of this country. These dictators are dead, yet the world is still full of those who follow the same path. Let us not forget, history, if not told, will repeat itself, and if we close our eyes, the future will once again resemble the past, dark, filled with screams, and merciless.